The forced and coerced sterilization of Indigenous women is specific to genocide because it seemed to have, target on a marginalized group of Indigenous women who were vulnerable.
Tonight, women who experienced coerced sterilization gathered in Quebec today for the first annual national gathering.
We're burning out our healthcare professionals.
A recent spike in overdoses in Saskatchewan has an NDP politician calling for the government to do more. And Buffy Sainte-Marie has been stripped of more awards. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Vulnerable women are experiencing forced and coerced sterilization across Canada, and that includes Indigenous women. As Savannah Craig reports, survivors were invited to the first national gathering in Gatineau, Quebec this weekend, hosted by the Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice.
This weekend, survivors of forced sterilizations have the opportunity to heal collectively, something that hasn't happened before on a national scale. Gasenyo Kik is Wolf Clan from Mohawk Six Nation. She spent a long time processing her experience in isolation due to shame.
I was 16 years old when the procedure happened during the delivery of my daughter. And I knew the procedure was happening, but I didn't have all of the proper information to be able to make an informed decision about my body and my long-term fertility. And so it took time to fully understand what was done to me.
She says she hopes the national gathering will allow survivors to come together and know they're not alone.
The true numbers of survivors of forced and coerced sterilization in Canada is not known.
In a press conference held ahead of the national gathering, Dr. Marilyn Cook of Mississippi Cree Nation shared what she witnessed working as a nurse in northern Manitoba in the 1970s.
I often saw the physicians coming in and making the decision that somebody needed their tubes to be tied or sterilized. And I would question whether the patient is fully aware of what they are going into the surgery for.
Cook says some patients also had birth control inserted without their knowledge.
I had one patient, she often wondered why she never got pregnant again, and I was doing a pap test on her. She hadn't had one done in years, and she had an IUD in that she never knew was there.
Senator Yvonne Boyer has a private member's bill, S-250, going through Parliament. It would penalize those responsible for forced or coerced sterilizations with up to 14 years in prison. She says this is happening to vulnerable people across the country, including Indigenous women.
The numbers that we have counted up to this point are at least 12,000. For instance, in Inuktitut, 26% of all the Inuit women were sterilized.
Boyer's efforts have been delayed since Parliament has been prorogued. But she says this issue will be her top priority when Parliament reconvenes.
We have 4 or 5 class action lawsuits happening across the country.
Malika Pop from Treaty 4 Fishing Lake First Nation is part of the class action in Saskatchewan.
The forced and coerced sterilization of Indigenous women is specific to genocide because it seemed to have, target on a marginalized group of Indigenous women who were vulnerable, exposed in their most vulnerable exposed state, labor.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Gatineau.
A recent spike in overdoses has led the Saskatchewan NDP to urge the Saskatchewan Party government to do more for those facing addiction. NDP Shadow Minister for Mental Health and Addictions, Betty Nippy-Albright, says awareness must be raised about the crisis in the province. Prairie Harm Reduction, or PHR, recently contacted 56 Saskatoon organizations to talk about overdoses. They combined their responses with reports from the fire department. The result, a staggering 223 drug-related overdoses in just under 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the number of fatal overdoses is still unknown. Nippy Albright is calling on the province to fund community partners like PHR to support people fighting addiction. She stated addictions are complex and require government backing to increase awareness and ensure support for those helping in the community.
Also, invest in mental health and addiction workers. We're burning out our healthcare professionals, so the government needs to listen to those grassroots organizations, listen to those treatment centers that are doing phenomenal work, listen to the experts, the people that have the pulse of the community, instead of people from out of province, private companies. Instead of listening to them, listen to the people that we have here in this province.
An update now to a story we had on our noon show earlier today. BC Conservative leader John Rustad has removed his Attorney General critic Dallas Brody from the party over comments he says, quote, mock and belittle residential school survivors. Rustad says Brody made fun of residential school survivors by, quote, mimicking individuals who recounted stories of abuse. The removal comes after Brody posted to social media last month that there have been 0 child burials confirmed at the former Kamloops residential school. Brody also had words for Indigenous Conservative MLA Aaliyah Warbus. When Warbus disagreed with Brody's opinion, Brody said she belongs in the NDP party. Rustad says yesterday Brody challenged the caucus to fire her and called for a vote on her removal before walking out of the caucus room. Brody has yet to respond publicly. RCMP in Manitoba are saying that with the help from the Winnipeg Police Service, they've made multiple arrests in the Island Lakes area of northern Manitoba. They say their goal was to take as many prolific and violent offenders off the streets as possible to make communities in Manitoba safer. On February 24th, the Manitoba Integrated Violent Offender Apprehension Unit, that consists of Manitoba RCMP and Winnipeg Police, traveled northeast to the Island Lake RCMP detachment, where over the course of 3 days, they targeted violent offenders with outstanding warrants for their arrest. A total of 19 people were arrested without incident. They include 5 arrests in Garden Hill First Nation, 7 arrests in St. Teresa Point First Nation, and 7 arrests in Wasagamak First Nation. The RCMP and Winnipeg Police continue to investigate. There's no word yet on what specific charges have been laid. But we always want to hear your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. You can follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Embattled musical artist Buffy Sainte-Marie has been stripped of more Canadian awards. On Friday, Sainte-Marie's 5 Junos and 2 Polaris Music Prizes were taken back. Polaris representatives will not seek a return of the $50,000 prize she was given in 2015. Earlier in the week, she returned her Order of Canada. This after the Governor General's office said it was stripping Sainte-Marie of the designation last month. She's also no longer a member of the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. The 84-year-old has been under fire since a 2023 CBC Investigates story posed serious questions about her First Nations heritage. Sainte-Marie has admitted to being a U.S. citizen, but says she was adopted by a Cree family in Saskatchewan as a young adult. Still to come here tonight, we'll speak with the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada after the break. Welcome back. The Yukon government is reporting yet another leak at the Eagle gold mine in recent months, thanks to a leaky pipe. The leak was first noticed on February 17th by the mine's receiver. The receiver misidentified the leak as being contained at the time and did not immediately report it. Failure to contain the source resulted in an estimated 150 cubic meters in contaminated water released into the nearby environment. Tests done in the area determined elevated levels of cyanide, cobalt, copper, and nitrate, among the highest levels recorded. Daily water samples have returned to previous levels and suggest it is an isolated incident. However, the environmental impact may have negative effects on aquatic life within the Nacho-Nyakdun First Nation. Well, as we've been reporting, ground has finally been broken on a Mercury care home in Grassy Narrows. We spoke with Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu on Thursday about the groundbreaking and the latest on Jordan's Principle. Minister Hajdu, thanks for being with us. You were in Grassy Narrows for the groundbreaking on Wednesday. Good to see that finally moving ahead. Is there anything the federal government is looking to do to help expedite complete remediation of the English Wabigoon River, and any plans to hold the owners of the mill accountable?
Well, thanks. I mean, let me just back up to the treatment facility itself. This is an extraordinary piece of work by Grassy Narrows to see this completed. And I will say they've worked incredibly hard with consultants, with architecture consultants, with designers to make sure that the treatment center itself is built to meet the needs of people living with mercury poisoning. There's also a 30-year commitment for operating costs attached to the center, something the community felt was essential in terms of providing the confidence to community members that the center would be there for the entire course of someone's lifespan, really. I mean, these are folks that are, in some cases, very and significantly affected by mercury poisoning, and of course it's a debilitating disease that can get worse over time. It was really wonderful to see elders in the community celebrating. In some ways, celebrating feels like a weird word, but really celebrating that there will be a way for community members to be cared for at home, surrounded by culture and language. In terms of the restoration of the river and the waterways, look, what we've seen is the provincial government refused to take seriously the protection of waterways, whether it's in Grassy Narrows in the English River system, whether it's other emissions and areas that are known to be contaminated with companies that have infractions that aren't followed up on. This is actually very concerning for, I think, all residents of Canada, certainly residents of Ontario. And it is partly why the defeat of Bill C-61, or I guess the conclusion of Bill C-61, was so disappointing in the fall session of the House of Commons. That is one area where the federal government has some ability to help First Nations protect their water sources through water legislation for First Nations people. But as you would know, Dennis, water protection in provincial waterways is completely at the discretion of the provincial governments who have the jurisdiction and the responsibility to do that work.
And in terms of holding the owners of the mill, many owners over the years, but holding them accountable? Again,
the province of Ontario has an opportunity to do a better job with previous and with current owners who continue to violate regulations that are there and intended to be followed so that people don't find themselves in situations where the water or the land is poisoned. The federal government has very few tools to be able to impose our own infractions or stop orders or indeed orders for cleanup, and the end result is exactly what we saw yesterday. You know, millions and millions of dollars paid to help manage illness that in many cases, in the case of mercury poisoning, is not reversible. We have to do a better job across all levels of government. That's why it's important that we do have, legislation that ensures that when major projects move forward, that First Nations people are part of the conversation, part of the wealth creation, and and part of the people that have the tools and the capacity to be able to monitor how natural resource projects are done within their traditional territories.
Minister, it's been about a month now since major changes were made to Jordan's Principle. An Indigenous Services Canada memo made it seem like things were getting approved under Jordan's Principle that should not have been. Was ISK approving things that should have not been approved, and what responsibility would it take for that?
Well, I think Indigenous Services Canada has done a really admirable job with over $8.8 billion worth of Jordan's Principles products and services approved since 2016. That means a lot of care for kids. But we were following the CHRT orders to, try to approve those products as quickly as possible to ensure that we weren't imposing barriers that would make it more difficult for kids to get care. And what's become clear is that we all need to work under parameters that give community members, give families, and give providers confidence that we can continue to do this work together. Part of that is making sure that we have a better line of sight on what is needed when and how we prioritize those requests. And I can tell you that we are starting to see improvement in the backlog because we are actually improving our own processes and because we're asking more providers in terms of the details that decision makers need to approve requests.
We've heard of things like Saskatchewan's food and infant program being cut due to the changes in Jordan's Principle. Can we expect to see a number of programs being canceled with these changes?
I actually think we'll see a strengthening of programs and we'll see a strengthening of accountability for programs. And I think that's the balance we need to get right. You heard yourself, Jordan River Anderson's family talk about the intent of Jordan's Principle getting subverted through kinds of claims that, really in their minds weren't the intent of the original Jordan's Principle movement. I would say that there are, organizations that have put in large group requests without details about names of children getting care, ages, dates of treatment care, where the resources are going. And I think everybody expects better. And so I think we can do that together. And our goal remains the same, that kids get the care that they need, that every level of government is working together to make sure that kids, no matter what their no matter whether they're First Nations, no matter whether they're non, that we have a Canada where every kid feels like their lives matter and their lives have value. And that's, what the work of Jordan's Principle is ultimately, to make sure there aren't gaps in care. It's not meant to replace care. It's not meant to replace services that should be available through, for example, provincial systems. It's been really disappointing to see provinces try to offload responsibilities for education to Jordan's Principle. That's not the spirit of Jordan's Principle. But I can tell you the federal government is committed to continuing to closing those gaps, working with community organizations. And if there are First Nations organizations that are worried about their funding or their approach being jeopardized by changes to Jordan's Principle, they should reach out to the department and make sure that we are all working together to ensure those kids that they're providing those services for have what they need.
Minister, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
The Governor General's Awards for Visual and Media Arts have been announced. We'll tell you about that and a special hockey game happening this weekend after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And while traveling along Highway 17 near Nipissing First Nation, Michelle Chrétien had the experience of snapping a photo of a local fox, and then shared it with all of us. Thanks, Michelle. Quite the photo. You can send your pictures to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, snow and +1 in Halifax, Fredericton, and St. John's. -10 with flurries in Kuujjuaq, 2 above in Nain. -3 in Montreal, 12 below with snow in Chibougamau. -2 in Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay. +1 with snow in Thunder Bay, -3 and flurries in Sioux Lookout. -9 in God's Lake, 15 below in Churchill. +2 in Winnipeg, -1 and snow in Dauphin. 3 in Regina and Saskatoon. 9 in Meadow Lake, 6 in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, +1 with snow in High Level, -9 and snow in Fort Chipewyan. 10 above in Edmonton, 13 in Lethbridge. 9 in Vancouver, 16 in Kamloops. 7 in Prince George, 5 in Smithers. -19 in Old Crow, +2 in Whitehorse. -21 in Yellowknife, 23 below in Norman Wells. -23 in Sax Harbor, -27 in Paulatuck. -22 with snow in Chesterfield and Arviat. -24 in Resolute, 11 below with snow in Iqaluit. The 2025 recipients of the Governor General's Awards in Visual and Media Arts have been announced. Each of the 8 artists will all receive a medal and a $25,000 cash prize. 59-year-old Cree visual artist Kent Monkman won his award for artistic achievement. A member of Fisher River Cree Nation in Manitoba, Monkman's sometimes controversial works reflect his interpretations of colonization in Canada, Indigenous resilience, and his Two-Spirit identity. Some poignant pieces look at the government's forced removal of Indigenous children from their families. Monkman partly grew up in Winnipeg and has explored artistic mediums like painting, film, and installation throughout his career. He's also a recipient of a 2014 Inspire Award and the 2017 Premier's Award for Excellence in the Arts. Monkman was made an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2023. And finally here tonight, we hope you join us on Saturday night for another round of Hockey Night in Canada, this time though in Inuktitut. Our hosts, Pujut Kuzigak, David Nian Nayo Nuyon, and Robert Kupfituyan are in town from Nunavut, and our entire production team is excited to bring you the game in Inuktitut for the first time on APTN. For the hosts, they say being able to make the game accessible to Inuktitut speakers is a dream come true. You can watch the Edmonton Oilers versus the Dallas Stars in Inuktitut on Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And Pujut, David, and Robert are just out in the newsroom right now, likely with fists clenched over how I just pronounced their last names, but it's going to be an exciting game. Can't wait. That's all the time we have for tonight's newscast. But you can tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for APTN National News Weekend. And you can always find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And don't forget that hockey game tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Stick around. Kim Sullivan is up next with your French language newscast. Have a great night.